says it's running. According to my little machine here, it says it's running, but I'm still not seeing the video. All the little green lights come up, so that's a good sign. And I should suddenly appear. There it is. I'm here. What do you know? Okay, we're going to have class in about 2 minutes. How's that? Let's start there. I'll change it in a minute. All right. Anna, Shanchi, it's good to be with you one more time. It's on a day like this, a class like this, that I really miss having you here in the room. I've already graded. I've caught up on the grading. I know, and in fact, I'm incredibly embarrassed to find out how far behind I was, especially considering the fact that it didn't take me that long to get caught up, and I apologize. But you all are doing very well. No serious problems at all. But what would be wonderful, since I've already read your translation of Proverbs 16, it'd be wonderful to be able to say, okay, let's go back and forth and discuss this. I don't exactly have that to help me here. I don't have you here, so I'll just have to go on. We'll work through this, and I'll just make commentary as we go. And I apologize for the fact that I can't immediately feedback. What I can do, however, is ask you to ask questions online, and I'll see if I can't come back. Send me an email asking the questions. Next time I teach this course, and probably Hebrew 1 and Hebrew 2, since I undoubtedly will have students online, and we don't know yet, since they're talking about a new surge starting up again in the fall, whether we'll go through this again. But either way, I'm going to have to deal with students online, and I'll probably figure out a way to let you text in your questions or something. I may have to break down and get a Twitter account. It's not impossible that I'll do that, but it's close. I mean, I'm old. Give me a break. All right. Let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll get started. And I want to kind of back up a little bit. To be honest, I'm not quite sure where I stopped last week. I was planning, I thought I got all the way through verse 16 or 17, but I want to make sure I covered some turf in a couple of verses before that, so if I repeat a little bit, I apologize. But right now, let's pray. Lord, you know, I think we're all finding it very, very easy to complain, to express our irritation about things. Here in Kansas City, the weather just keeps getting wet, dry. We had a long time before the cold went, and then when it did go away, we got standing grass that keeps getting rained on every other day, so we can't even get it mowed. That's my complaint. Students are not here. That's easy to complain about. I can't deal directly with them. There's so many things we can complain about if we believe that we have a right to complain. But Lord, we know we don't. We know that the only thing we've actually earned in life is hell. And by your wonderful grace through Jesus Christ, we are spared receiving what we deserve and the thing we earned. And that everything else is grace. Help us to face life that way every moment of every day, remembering that we are in the hands of a mighty God who's in control of all things, who is also a gracious God who takes care of us. Doesn't give us what we deserve, gives us better than we ever will deserve. And so when the circumstances we don't particularly enjoy, Lord, help us to rejoice in the fact that we are in the hands of such a wonderful God, even if we find the situation unpleasant. But Lord, acknowledging your right to do things your way and rejoicing in the fact that you are a God of incredible grace, we come to you in response to your word, bringing our requests to you. There are some who are associated with Calvary out in Colorado who have been diagnosed with the COVID-19. Watch over them, Lord. Protect them. Help them to deal with the situation in a way that honors and glorifies you. And Lord, show your greatness in sparing them the worst ravages of the disease, if it be possible in your purpose. For those who've not been gotten in contact, like as far as we know, like myself, my wife, and virtually everyone I know on this campus, I pray, Lord, that that will continue. That we will be safe and secure because we are in your hand, and that we will not be subject to the difficulties which others face. And help us, Lord, to always give you the glory for that fact. But that being said, there are a lot of frustrations. We're all finding out how difficult it is to be isolated, to be kept in. Even those of us like me, who never really was an outdoors type person, wants to be outdoors, and although I'm a guy who holds up in my office without pain, I want to be out with people. And I think of those who are more sociable than I and more involved in the day-to-day affairs of other people's lives than I. Lord, I know how hard this must be for them. And what am I telling you? You know it. You know it better than I. So be there for them, Lord. Be there for all of us. Help us to rest in you. And above all, help us to find ways to glorify you, to minister to those who are suffering, or struggling, or frustrated, or just irritated or irritable because of this situation. I pray for Shang-Chi and I pray for Anna that you would be with them in whatever the specific circumstances they're facing, and help them to be at peace and to do well for your glory. And Lord, I pray for others on this campus, some situations that I know of that desperately need your hand upon them to establish peace and harmony, to solve what seem like unsolvable problems, and help all of us to get back on track. So Lord, I pray your grace, always your grace. And then Lord, I also know that you are the great God of the universe. There's nothing that happens on this earth that you aren't in total control of. And as I've said repeatedly every time I pray, Lord, I know you can stop this infection, this pandemic, by simply snapping your fingers. It can go just like that. And we know that if you don't do that, there's a reason. But Lord, we pray that you would deliver us from this pandemic, but in a way where you get the glory, where it will be evident to those who are even open to the possibility of seeing that it is God who has preserved and protected and delivered us, not some scientific team in Washington or some researcher somewhere else in the world, but that you are the great Savior, even from something as relatively insignificant as this pandemic. And I pray that through this very difficult these very difficult circumstances, not only would you get glory, but that you would draw many new folks to salvation. Bring them to trust in you and to grow and serve you. Now be honored and glorified in this class, and help us to think clearly not only about Hebrew and get a better sense of how the Hebrew language works in these various literary and discourse genres or types, but also about the message itself, about the truth that we're dealing with. We are walking on holy ground, Lord. Help us to remember that. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Let's do this. And since you can't see that, how about I give you a chance to see it? There we go. Let's go to Proverbs 16, and we're going to look at, well, let me see, let me go back one. Well, I'll just leave it like this. Let's look at verse 13 and 14. We have, I know we went through these, I remember them, but we have Ratzon Melachim, Siftei Tzedek, Vadover Yesharim Ye'ehav. All right. What actually, woodenly it says, the favor of kings are lips of righteousness. Now the question, and we're going to have to deal with this on several cases, the question is, which is the subject? Is it the favor of kings, or is it lips of righteousness? Or righteous lips, if you insist. Because I don't have a verb here that tells me which is the subject. I have a verbless clause. I have two noun phrases. One is the subject and one is the predicate. Technically, I could be more specific and say the difference here is not really subject and predicate as much as it is member and set. If you've had set theory in mathematics, you know, X is a member of the set Z or something like that. And the question is, which is the member and which is the set? Now, sometimes the set can have only one member. So, the Lord, He is God. There's only one God, there's only one Lord. So, the Lord is a member of a set that has only one member, and that member is the Lord. That's Psalm 100, in case you didn't recognize the quotation. But most of the time, we have more than one member to the set. And that's what we have to look at here. We say, all right, is it lips? Which of these is, as it were, the narrower, the more specific? And that's going to be your subject. And the broader, the set is going to be the broader. So we have Ratzon Melachim, the favor of a king. That is a figure of speech. Actually, the favor of a king is a figure of speech known as a metonymy, where it means, in this case, a metonymy of the effect, which is the effect of X is the king has favor. You're in the king's favor. So the king's favor. So we're looking at things that bring the king's favor, and one of them is lips of righteousness. Now we can go through Scripture. The Lord is also pleased by other things. He is favored about other things. Now it's always good. So it's not that among the various things that are lips of righteousness is the favor of the king. It is among the things that bring the king's favor are lips of righteousness. So our subject is Siftei Tzedek. We're saying Siftei Tzedek is a member of the set Ratzon Melachim. That is, it's one of the things that brings the favor of a king. Now, I'm saying one of those things. Don't translate that way. That's how we understand it. It is that, anyway, lips of righteousness, and I translated, I think I did in my thing. Let me take a look here. Yeah. All right, I say I have, or it could be brings, but lips of righteousness have the favor of kings, is how I translated it, with the have in italics, meaning the Hebrew doesn't have the word have, it really is an equal sign, or more accurately, it is an epsilon, is a member of, that little symbol, is a member of the set, favor of kings. And I can confirm that because I look down in the second part and I have dover yesharim ye'ehav. Now I have a verb. And I'm told that speakers of uprightness he loves. Notice the verb, a speaker of righteousness he loves. Now it could actually be grammatically a speaker of righteousness loves, but love almost always, well actually virtually always, to the point where I'm almost ready to say always, is a transitive verb. It's a special kind of verb that takes a different kind of object, but it requires an object. I love, and so if I go around telling people I love, someone's going to say, what do you love? Who do you love? What are you talking about? And that's true in English, it's true in German, it's true in Greek, it's true in Hebrew, I suspect it's true in Chinese. When you say you love, you've got to have something, I know it would be the different words, but you get the point. You have to have something that is the object of that love. The person who is the goal toward which your affections yearn or your commitment is made. And in this case, that goal would be the one speaking righteousness. And the subject would therefore be Melech, the king. So we have a more specific, notice, plural in the first part of the verse, singular in the second part of the verse. I have a little theory, and it's my little theory, my little heresy, if you want. So don't write this down as an absolute, but you can kind of see if it works out in your experience. I have a theory that when you have a singular and a plural side by side, the idea is to kind of get the sense that we covered the whole thing. I'm dealing with kings in general, I'm dealing with each king in particular. It's the same principle. One is, they're both general principles, but one focuses on each king, one focuses on all kings. But whether I'm right or wrong about that, it's clear that this has to be, the subject has to be king. And so the king loves those who speak uprightly, and when they speak uprightly, of course, they would have lips of truth. So in this verse, I have a confirmation of my idea that that the subject has to be siftei tzedek, and that ratzon malachim is the predicate, just as dober yesharim is the direct object or the object of ye'ehav. We go down to verse 14, we have a similar situation. Chamat melech, malachei mawit. Now here we have another figure of speech, another example of a metonymy of effect for the cause. It says, the anger of a king is messengers of death. Executioners, if you will. And we all know what it's saying. If you make a king mad, he can have you killed, have you executed. But it's clear that the question here is, what is the subject? Let's start with that. In this case, I can say, well, lots of things make a king mad, but this isn't talking about what makes a king mad. It's talking about what is the effect of making a king mad. And so the subject is the anger of the king, and the predicate would be the source of that anger. Or, pardon me, the results of that anger. So I can't use the same rule here. I have to think it through. So you just have to figure it out from the context and from the in this case, context, I don't mean words before, I mean the general sense of what we're talking about, the specific. It's what they call the situational context. What is he talking about? He's not talking about this is a cause for anger that messenger of death makes kings angry, is saying no, that king's anger makes messengers of death. And so the messenger of death are the result. You can almost see if a king is angry, then he sends messengers of death. We see clearly that the king is the anger of the king is the subject, and messengers of death is the predicate. But as I said, it's a metonymy of result, or a metonymy of effect. The effect put for the cause. It says the king's anger, and how did I put it in my translation? I put means. The rage of a king means messengers of death. This is where it leads, or leads to. The effect of, it's the consequence of. It says, it really has the idea that if you make a king angry, there's no telling how bad the situation can be, right up to your own death. And then we look at the rest of the verse, the immediate context, because it's going to have the same basic message. And only this case is kind of interesting. Wa ish hacham yakaparenu rena, but a man, a wise man, covers it. Maybe actually assuages it, eases it. The word literally is covers, but the idea is clear. It covers up the anger so the king doesn't get mad. And he says, the messenger of death. You get him angry, he says, but a wise man will. Now, the idea seems to be here. First of all, it's clearly a contrast. But what kind of contrast? Is this the kind of contrast a wise son makes a glad father, foolish son is a grievous mother? We have two contrasting ideas, and it's all just saying this is unlike this. Not in this case. We're not saying that. What we're saying is contrary to expectation. Notice, the anger of a king means messengers of death. But, contrary to expectation, when a king's angry with a wise man, the wise man finds a way to calm him down, to cover up the anger. Now, point being, simple plugging in of English translations doesn't finish the job of translating or interpreting a passage, a verse like this. You've got to think it through and figure out exactly what's being said. And that's why when you look at your English translations, you'll find often a variety of ways they put it, even though they're expressing roughly the same thought. Because they're trying to go beyond a simple mechanical X equals Y type of thing, and just translate it woodenly. And that's important because wooden translations, I've mentioned this before, but please don't lose it. Please remember it. A simple wooden translation into English, and then you read the English translation, often will have a different meaning than the Hebrew. In other words, sometimes it's simple as, what is it, in 1 Corinthians, he says, what was it? Not mercy, but whatever it is, the compassion of Christ compels us. The love of Christ compels. That's what it is. The love of Christ compels us. Is it saying our love for Christ or Christ's love for us? See, if I say the love of Christ compels us, I can go either way. If I'm interpreting the passage, though, I have to figure out which way it goes. Is he saying if I love Christ enough, I will go out? Or is he saying in the context of what Paul is saying, it's Christ's love for us that is the primary motivation for my living for him? And I think if you read the passage, you'll discover that is exactly what it is. It's Christ's love for me that motivates me, or should, or us, since Paul speaks in the plural. And that's the thing we have to do here. You have to go ahead and think it through and come up with it. The only time I've really had trouble with students learning Hebrew, they were students who came from an engineering background. And not every time I had an engineering student, but the times that I've had struggles, it's almost always been somebody who was really into math or engineering, sometimes science, in their bachelor's degree, and then they came to the Calvary Seminary, and they want to make it a mathematical thing. If I see this, it means that. And it's a little more subtle than that. We have to think it through. All right, verse 15. continuing this comparison of kings, Ba'or Pnei Melech Haim, in the light of the king's face is light, and here we have to deal with the light of the king's face means the king is happy with you. Waratzono, Urtzono, I get it's pronounced right, it'd be easier. Urtzono Ka'av Malkosh. But, and his favor, this is verse 15, yeah. And his favor is like a cloud of spring rain. And we talked about what the cloud of spring rain meant. It's refreshing. It has the anticipation of good things to follow. When the spring rain comes, it means the crop's going to come in, and we're going to have a good harvest. And when the king has a good look on his face, it means good things are about to happen, as opposed to the king's anger. And you know, we go back and forth. Now, it's interesting. We have verse 13 talks about the favor of the king, and it's two things compared. The first line is clarified and amplified by the second line of verse 13. Verse 14, the second line gives a contrast, a contrary expectation, counter expectation. You expect that if the king's angry, it's going to be bad, even to the point of somebody dying. But a wise man can counter that situation. And then in verse 15, we have another example of a statement followed by an amplification or clarification of that statement. So that the second line is almost really a paraphrase, a figure of speech to make it work. Now, let's see, I think this one actually does work. A lot of these, their batteries are dead. We'll see if this one is one of them. Still there, so let's see if we can get her. All right, I know I got a little bit of had a lengthy prayer. Let me take a couple of more shots here, and then we'll go back, take a break, maybe a little shorter break than normal, and then because I want to finish Proverbs 16 tonight and kind of set you up for next week. But Proverbs 16:16. Now here's something that's very interesting. We have Kano Chachma Ma Tov Me Charutz. What we have here is what is known as it's known by a dozen different names, actually, depending on who you read. The classic term was casus pendens, a hanging clause or case. It's also called a front or a dislocation or a detached construction. The idea, it is also called a topicalization, which is generally the best thing. We have here, and it's interesting because normally it's a noun phrase, and it's saying, I'm talking about this. And in this case, kano is a noun phrase of sorts, right? Kano is an infinitive absolute. Or is it a command? Acquire wisdom. Let me do that. I just thought of something. Seems like I went round and round on this one, so let's look at kana. Kof nun he. See if there is a infinitive construct that has kano or infinitive absolute. Yes, infinitive construct can be either kano or connote. And the imperative would be kane, so it's not an imperative. It is the infinitive construct. So how are we going to translate it? We're used to translating infinitives as to acquire wisdom, and that'll work. We can also translate it by a gerund in English, acquiring wisdom. Understanding that acquiring is used as a noun, which is what an infinitive is. It's a verbal noun. So let's try this. Acquiring wisdom, dash. How much better than fine gold or refined gold? Charutz has to do with not just the ore itself, but the ore as it comes out after refining. And you go, okay, how much better is it than root? And you see how this is a disjunctive construction because the ma almost always comes at the beginning of a clause. And here it's in the middle of this verse. And so we can say this is a disjointed thing. It's like saying things like, my wife, she's always getting on my nerves. She's not, but it's fun to say it when she's not in the room to hurt me. My wife, she's always getting on my nerves. Well, I'm saying, I'm talking about my wife, and here's what I have to say about her. Now, or I could say, my wife always gets on my nerves. But if I say, my wife, she's always getting on my nerves, that says, okay, listen, I want you to pay attention to what I'm going to say. And here's the important thing. And that's what he's saying here. He says, acquiring wisdom. Think about this. Acquiring wisdom. It's much better than gold. Probably much better than acquiring gold. If you're going to put effort into getting something, get wisdom. Don't worry about getting wealthy. It's okay to get wealthy. The book of Proverbs in chapter 12 tells you that it's better to be rich than poor as long as you're righteous. But if you have to choose between wisdom and righteousness, you got to go with righteousness, because or with wisdom in this case, because that's the really important thing. And then we have the parallel here which is the same verb and different form of the infinitive construct. Connote. Uknot, binah, and acquiring understanding, nifchar, and that's the nifal participle of bachar, to choose, mikafes, is better than, kasef is what I'm trying to say, is better than silver. And you go, oh. And so we have the cleared. And acquiring, and that tells me this is probably acquiring wisdom and acquiring silver. So we put the two thoughts together and we say, look, acquiring wisdom and understanding, if you want to put them together, but they are treated almost as synonyms here. Virtual synonyms, maybe I should say. Acquiring wisdom and understanding, or perceptive wisdom, if you want to go something like that, is better than acquiring wealth. That's it. All right. Verse 17. Masilat Yesharim Sur Merah. The first line here, of course, is a highway. It refers to something that is not just a trail, not just a track that happened, the route people take. It would be, on this campus, would be something like the difference between a sidewalk and a worn road, a worn rut across the grass. All the students walk that route because it's the most direct route. That would not be masalah. A masalah would be something that was actually prepared and intended. And so it would be something which presumably would be easier to walk on. It would be smoothed out and reduce the possibility of something to trip on and so forth. So it says a highway of upright ones is, and sur is the infinitive construct of sur, which means to turn aside, is turning aside from ra. Now the challenge here in terms of interpreting is the word ra. Does it mean, it means evil, it means bad, but is he talking about moral evil, or is he talking about just bad things? I think we're going to have to figure it out from the next part of the verse, but right now we have a bigger problem. What's the subject? And we'll say, is it telling me that that turning from evil is a highway, or is it telling me that the highway of a righteous man is turning from evil? Now, in this case, it's fairly simple. Which of the two clauses, which of the two phrases, Masilat Yesarim or Sur Merah, which of those two phrases is figurative? Because the subject of the clause is going to be literal. The figure is going to be the predicate, or the predicate will be the figure. And in this case, we have a metaphor, and the opening clause here is the predicate. The opening phrase here is the predicate. Masalat Yesarim. He says that's what we're talking about. So he says, turning from, so if you put it in smooth English word order, you say, turning from evil, and we'll have to deal with what evil is in a minute, is a highway. for, oh, I know what I'm looking at this stupid clock in here. It's way off. Sorry, I got plenty of time. For those of you who are hoping to get a break soon, I still got about 20 minutes. All right. All right. Is a highway for upright men. And we have to say, and the first question is, what does that mean? Does it mean if you turn from evil, it makes your way a prepared, smooth way? Or is it saying that turning from evil for an upright man is like walking on a prepared highway? It's easy. If you're the right kind of person, it's easy to turn aside from evil. And the meaning of the word evil is going to matter. But let's take the second word. Shomer nafsho, one guarding his life. Not soul in the New Testament sense, but his life. Notzer darko, one guarding his path. In this case, we got to say that I think we have the same situation, that the predicate is the first participial phrase. The one guarding his path is guarding his way. And so we say, aha. Now we have to go back to ra. The word ra, as I've mentioned several times, can mean moral sin. It can refer to evil. It can refer to bad things that we should not do. In the Proverbs, however, it quite often, and elsewhere too, but we're in the Proverbs. In the Proverbs, it quite often refers to bad situations. In Isaiah, the Lord says he creates evil. Well, he's certainly not creating sinful things. What's he saying? He says, I can make life wonderful, I can make life miserable. And if you don't believe that, talk to Pharaoh, the Pharaoh of the Exodus. He can tell you, when God decides to make your life miserable, he does a good job of it. 10 plagues he just poured out on us, made us miserable. And so bad things can be uncomfortable things, injurious things, difficulties, struggles, frustrations. Now, if that's the meaning here, let's see what it says. It says, turning away from bad things is easy for those who are upright. And you go, wait a minute, he's not talking about upright people can resist temptation. He's talking about upright people can avoid trouble, avoid pain, avoid harm. You know, while it's not true that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people, it is true that if you want to avoid bad times, the smart thing is to be a good person. Good people are more likely to evade suffering, apart from persecution, which is a different ballgame and not dealt with in the book of Proverbs. But in terms of general living on this planet, the person who lives a responsible life and doesn't argue with people, and he keeps his promises and he fulfills his contracts, he's going to have a lot fewer problems, general problems of life, than the person who doesn't do that. The person who is constantly looking for an angle to get around and break the rules or whatever. He's not living uprightly. He's crooked. And so I think the proverb is saying that. And so he says, so now we turn to the second part. We say, the one who guards his way, his pattern of life, which would be the upright man, the one who guards his way is the one who guards his life. And his life here not just keep you alive, but give you a better life. Yes, in terms of what this Proverbs, the specific things the Proverb says, it works better that way. If I try to turn rak into moral evil, sin, and I say, a highway for the upright is turning from sin, and the highway then becomes an easy road, and you go, no one ever finds turning from sin an easy road. It doesn't matter how long you walk with the Lord and how long you've been serving him. temptation is always there, and it gets, in some ways, it gets worse as you get older. The stronger you are and the better able you are to resist it, the bigger the temptations that come, and the greater the chance that you'll be blindsided by them. So I don't think that experientially that works. And it doesn't grammatically, it isn't as smooth either. So I think that we have to go with this. Oh, this is saying, if you want to avoid trouble, then you want to be an upright person. And so therefore, if you're going to avoid trouble, you have to be an upright person. So guard your way. That's what makes you an upright person. A person who walks consistently. That's the walk, is our consistent behaviors. Remember what I said, a walk is how you live when you're not thinking about how you live. So walk consistently, pay attention to how you walk, to your day-to-day life, and do it right. And you're protecting your life from all these troubles. And again, that not only works beautifully with the grammar and the context of the two clauses put side by side, it also fits with experience. We see that happening in life all the time if we look. Now, it's not a rule, it's not a law. It doesn't say you live right and no trouble will come to you. That's absolutely wrong. The book of Proverbs doesn't say, the book of Proverbs knows better and says so. Other wisdom literature like Job really proves that. And of course the New Testament is very clear that doing righteously will sometimes bring suffering. But it's a suffering that comes from persecution and not just the general suffering that we face in life. All right. Verse 18. Let's see, can I do this so I'm not turning my way? Yeah, let's see how far I can turn. There we go. Now I'm not having to turn quite as far away from you to see it. And actually it's easier, more readable on this angle too. On verse 18. Lifnei shever na'on wa lifnei kashalon govah ruach. All right, this is a very familiar proverb, although it is almost always misquoted in English by Christians as well as by the general public. They'll say, pride grows before destruction. Or actually what they usually say is, pride goes before a fall. What the text actually says, pride is before crushing or breaking is pride. And before, before stumbling is a haughty spirit. Haughty has the idea of lifted up, exalted. This is where you look down on other people. That's why Govaha is the idea of haughtiness of spirit, is an attitude of treating others as inferiors. And he says that it's going to bring you trouble. When I was in Vietnam, about 6 weeks before I left to come back to the States, we had a new officer come into the unit. I was the executive officer of the 526 replacement company, and he was the new executive officer of the 510th replacement company. We're both part of the 22nd replacement battalion. Just so everybody knows, that's how battalions have companies under that. Anyway, and so he came, and we had what we called the officers' club. It was actually just a room, or two rooms actually, in the the officers' barracks, if you want to call it a barracks. But anyway, and we would meet there. They had a refrigerator there where you could get, and we could buy for ourselves sodas, which is what I got, or beer. We didn't stock any hard liquor there, although some guys would buy it and keep it in their rooms. But they'd come there and they'd send us Hollywood movies to watch, or we'd play games or something. It was just a way to blow off steam when we weren't working. And it was generally very quiet, a bunch of nice guys. Everybody kind of got along. We liked each other. And so this guy was brought by his commanding officer, brought him to the club and introduced him to us. Says, this is Lieutenant so-and-so. And we said, well, welcome. I think you're going to like it here. We're well out of the line of fire, so you're not going to probably have very little chance of getting injured or killed in this war. And our unit's going to be standing down in a few months, so you may get to go home early before you finish your tour. So there are a lot of good things. And we're talking nice to him, encouraging him like that, which is the kind of stuff guys who were facing the war want to talk about. and then we stopped, and he's looking at us like this. And he's where every officer in the Army officer in the Army, has a mark of the branch of the Army he's in. I was, several of us in the room, because of the nature of the unit we were in, were what we call the Adjutant General's Corps, and that is people basically who do a lot with paperwork and personnel. If the enemy attacks, we can take out rifles and fight back, but we spend most of our time fighting red tape. And then we had a couple of guys who were in the infantry, and we had an artillery guy there, not an artillery guy, an armor guy there, and some other, some officers, and he's looking like this, and he goes, he's field artillery, and he goes, well, I don't see anyone here who's in the field artillery but me. We said, yeah, you're the first. And he goes, field artillerymen have the highest average intelligence of any branch of the Army, which being interpreted is, I'm smarter than any of you. I leaned over to my best friend who was standing right next to me, Lieutenant Hendricks, and I said, I think we know who's keeping the average down. But he treated us like we were inferiors. And it did come back to bite him. His commanding officer asked us my unit, to turn over some buses and their drivers over to him, because our unit was going home. And he said, turn over to Lieutenant blankety blank. I can't remember his name now. It's just as well since I'm bad-mouthing him. But, turn over to him. And as soon as you can. And the guy who had that responsibility went to, I was there. There were several of us who we were going over to buy souvenirs or something. He was going with us. And I was clear blue, this guy was, Lieutenant, I like it. How soon can you take these buses and bus drivers off my hands? And Lieutenant, what's his name, goes, and then he goes, and for the smart guy, it was fun to watch his brain actually work slowly. And he goes, wait a minute. He goes, I'm not in a hurry to take on your problems. If you've got a problem, you take care of it before you try to pass it on to me. And he goes, okay, Lieutenant, if that's what you feel, then I'm not trying to make trouble for you. I'm not. And these are, and the lieutenant got a big smile on his face. About 2 weeks later, his company commander came storming into our office, screaming, why is it that those buses haven't been turned over to Lieutenant so-and-so? And he's furious. I told you 2 weeks ago I wanted those transferred to my command. And the fellow who did it looked at him and he said, well, sir, I told Lieutenant so-and-so that I offered to take him on, and he said he wasn't in a hurry to take on somebody else's problems. And this guy goes, he did he? And he went out exploding. And Lieutenant so-and-so came charging up about 20 minutes later, which means this guy chewed him out for at least 10. I'll take those buses now. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I didn't understand. And the fellow that did it looked at me and winked and smiled. Said, got it. Pride does that. It sets you up because if you think you're the smartest guy in the room, that means you're stupid. Because somebody's going to take advantage of that. Not only that, you're going to end up choosing to do things you shouldn't do. See, it's a wonderful proverb and one every one of us knows from experience. But the interesting thing about the way the proverb says, he says, you know, if you're going to have that these bad things, almost always, that's the way it's presented. It's saying as the you see a disaster, you see a stumbling, a serious stumble, you see a breaking or a shattering of somebody's life. He says before it there was a fall, there was arrogance. You know, if you're humble, you can see things clearly and know that trouble is coming and avoid it. If you're arrogant, you think you have so much control of everything that you don't have to worry about it. You've got it all together. And instead, it all comes apart. So notice the order here. It's on this case, the two prepositional phrases are clearly the the predicates of these things, and they come first. And that's why before he says, think about it. These problems are not where this did not start with a problem. The problem started with somebody being preoccupied with how great they were, how smart they were, how adequate they were. All right, in verse 19, we have another one of our better clauses. And you can almost always see this because we have a tov, and then the second line begins may. So tov, shiftal ruach, et anayim mechalek shalal, or no, shalal et geim. I was trying to figure out how to pronounce it. Verse 19, better, and this almost is like a result of the previous one. It is not, it's a separate proverb, but it's placed strategically here. If pride is going to bring you terrible destruction, he says, what about the alternative? He says, it's better to be lowly of spirit or humble in spirit with poor men. There's the two words here, shafal and anai, actually I think it is anal, had the idea of, both had the idea of lowness, but they're in different areas. One has to do with low income, the other has to do with low status. And he says, better to be a person who nobody pays any attention to and has no money, but is humble, doesn't have a bad attitude toward himself. He's not, the shafal ruach is the exact opposite of the gavah ruach. Gavah ruach is one who is a high view of himself. This one has a low view of himself. Not in the sense that I'm nobody, I'm nothing, I'm unimportant. No, not that. That's false humility. That's a different kind of pride. This is a person who doesn't bother to think about himself. He's not paying attention to himself because he's not that big a deal. And somebody doesn't treat him right, he may be irked by it, but he just goes on. He's the kind of person that if he's cut off in traffic, he doesn't experience road rage. He feels it well up and he's, let it go. I'm not a problem. It's not my problem. I'm not a big deal. It's not a big deal. And he says, so you got humility, but poverty. He says, it's better. Now, basic principle in these, when you have this better this with this or better this and that you have a positive and a negative in both clauses, both sections of the proverb. It says better to be humble with, and et here has to be with. There's no direct, it can't be a direct object because there's no verb. Better to be humble with the poor people, poverty-stricken folks, than to divide spoil with arrogant people. And you go, look, hey, we have gein here, and we go back up to verse 18, and we have gaon, a related form. So this is the arrogant. The for is arrogance or pride. and this is the adjective form, with arrogant people, with prideful people, proud people. And dividing spoil means you're going to get wealthy. You had in business, it would mean you had a great big success in business, and you had a huge dividend or a huge profit. You're making, if you're in the army, and in the army when the battle was won, they would take all the enemies, all the spoils of the victory, and lay them out, and everybody would get their share. And so people often in Rome, for example, would join the army specifically in the hopes of becoming wealthy by the spoils. They would be paid a basically monthly stipend and be fed and clothed, but their real hope for the future was all the booty they would bring home. And that's what he's saying. So that has to do with gaining wealth. And so he says it's better to be poor with a good character than to be rich with arrogance. Poor with humility, I should say, than rich with pride. Again, this always goes back to that idea that pride is more valuable. I mean, that humility is more. So what do we say? Is it better to be rich or poor? And the answer is, it is better to be rich than poor. That's always true. If you can't pay your bills, it's not near as good as being rich enough to be able to pay your bills without thinking. And just in general, it's better to be rich than be poor, all things being equal. He says, but is it better to be arrogant or humble? And the answer is, well, it's better to be humble than arrogant. He says, good. Now the question is, if I have to be humble, if I'm humble but my humility means I'm poor, does the poverty make my humility less than, in other words, and what we're basically saying is this shows how incredibly valuable humility is. Humility is incredibly more valuable than arrogance because it's so valuable that it can overcome poverty. A poor man with humility is better off than a rich man without it. Now, that's a simple statement. And notice how they word it. It's a simple statement of fact. But be careful, as I said, always put in that with. It is not true, as during the time, much of the history of the church, there was this idea that somehow the Bible taught that riches were evil. You have things like the love of money. Right? They say money is the root of all evil. And the answer is no, it's the love of money. And they'll say, oh, if you're rich, there's something wrong. Trying to think of U.S. Steel, founder of U.S. Steel, I can't think of his name. It's Carnegie, and Dale Carnegie came from here in Belton, and his name keeps blocking me, the other name. But Carnegie, anyway, became stinking rich because he was so brilliant a businessman. And as he came to the end of his life, he spent the last years of his life desperately trying to get rid of all of his money so he could die poor and go to heaven. Because he was absolutely convinced that if he was wealthy when he died, that God would condemn him for it. That's why there are Carnegie libraries all over the United States. He funded them totally. And other things, that the Carnegie Foundations and others. He did all that. But it was motivated by this sense that riches were bad. And the Bible doesn't teach riches are bad. What it's saying is, though, riches are not so good that they make it worth losing out on humility. All right, we're rattling on. We'll come to verse 20. When we come back, we'll have 13 verses or 14 verses left to go before we finish this chapter. Thank you for putting up with me. Let's take a pause. We will start again. I'll say it. At 7:05. How's that? Just slightly less than 10 minutes from now. And we're back. Pretty close. My watch says 7:05. My cell phone says it is 7:04, but pretty close to 7:05, almost 7:05. So one way or the other, we're pretty much back. Let's take a look at verse 20 now. Now we're introduced to this participial form that sometimes functions as a noun from the verb sakal, maskil al davar, yimsa tov, uvoteach badonai ashrao. Ashrao. Alrighty, this participle is from the verb sakal, and sakal has the idea of well, it can have the idea of succeeding. It can sometimes have. It has the idea of wisdom. It seems to have some. This is a word that is worthy of your time. Doing a little word study on. Please note it's sakal, not shakal. This is a sin, not a shin. And I just thought I'd look it up here to see. I hadn't thought about it. What our textbook says here, our Holidays lexicon, concise lexicon. And oops, one more page. All right, sakal. This is basically have success. But notice maskil. This is a hifil participle. And that's the most common use of it, is as a hifil. And it means, the things he says, it can mean to understand, or see, to make something or someone keen or clever, or to cause himself to have success, or to gain devotion, insight, or piety. Do it to oneself. And we have to, because that becomes a tough one here. You say, okay, what are we talking about here? Well, let's see what the rest of it is saying. All right. On word will find or does find good. So this is, the participle, remember, is normally, when it is used as a noun as opposed to an adjective, it is used as the doer of the action. So we say to make success on the word finds good. One making success of the word finds good. Let's see, sometimes the grammar will help us by saying that with al. And I look and see, to see or understand, it has el. With al, it means, he says, to pay, or with be or al, which is what we have here is al, he says means to pay close attention to. And he actually lists this verse as one of the examples. So he says the person who pays close attention to a word, or to word, will find good. So the subject is maskil al davar, the noun phrase, or actually a participial phrase, one who finds, one who pays close attention to word, and then the verb is yatzah, will find, and the object is good. And then we have uvoteach badonai, and have another participle. This is the kal participle, kal active participle, the verb batach, and one trusting in Yahweh, how blessed is he? And notice in this case, one trusting in Yahweh isn't really the subject. We have, because the phrase, the noun phrase ashrao, is literally blessed is he, or the blessedness of him. And so the subject is of the clause is the ow on the end, and the verb, or the predicate, I should say, not the verb, is asher, ashrai, actually. So the blessings of him, and so it's he has blessings. And so we got to say, oh, boteach badonai, that is one of those constructions that I said was called casus pendens, detached, they're dislocated, they're a variety of words. It refers to something, or sometimes it's called an absolute construction. It's just hanging out there. It is not grammatically part of the phrase or part of the clause, but it is semantically, in its meaning, is crucial to understanding the clause, even though its forms are irrelevant to the grammar. So it says, now as for one, and that's a good way to kind of paraphrase it here. Now as for one trusting in Yahweh, how blessed is he? Or blessed is he? So we say, okay, the one trusting in Yahweh is also the one who pays attention to word. And that's going to help us, because the book of Proverbs doesn't speak at length about the Bible. And it's talk about wisdom. Lots of times it will talk about the advice of wise men, or the advice of wisdom herself, because it's wisdom, since the feminine noun is usually presented as a woman, or a female anyway. But it doesn't talk about scripture as we would know it. And so you'll find that many commentators, most of them non-evangelical commentators, will say, oh, this is referring to the wise man's word. The one who listens to what I say will find good in life. And one who trusts in Yahweh, he is blessed. In which case they're saying there, and they'll say, well, that's one of two things here. Either he's saying what I say is what you need to know to trust Yahweh. Or they would say, more commonly, they would say something like this, oh, there are two thoughts here, and they're compared to one another. It says there are two secrets to success. One, pay attention to the wise man, and two, trust the Lord. Put them together. And that's a possibility. It certainly fits nicely with the rest of the Proverbs. I mean, we're going to find later, we won't find it in this chapter, but you will find it in the Proverbs later, where it says, fear God and the king. So there are two ways, to success here. Fear God, but also fear the king. And in this case, so that's possible. The other possibility is he's talking about the word of God in the first verse. And that fits in the book of Proverbs too. In chapter 28, I believe it is, in Proverbs, we have the statement, where there is no vision, the people perish, but he who keeps the law, happy is he. And the word for vision is the word that's normally used for divine revelation. And the word for perish doesn't mean die or cease to exist or become worthless. It means to run wild. It's what the people did when they worshipped the golden calf. They came down from the mountains and they heard this uproar like the sound of an army, because the people were running wild. And that's the word that the King James translated perish. So it says, where there is no revelation from God, the people run wild, but he who keeps the law, happy is he. Very similar to this one, isn't it? He who keeps the law, happy is he. He who trusts in the Lord, happy is he. And you get, so I think this is talking about the word of God. It's saying, if you're sharp enough, and the idea of masculine is paying attention. Remember, it says its basic sense in the cow is to be a success or be successful. It seems to be the idea of being successful in terms of gaining insight or understanding. It says, if you are successfully paying attention to the Word of God, if you have worked at it, and made something of it, put your life into it, and still you really are making it starting to become really a part of you, then you'll find good in life. And why? Because you'll trust the Lord and be blessed by. Trust the Lord, and that will bring you blessing. He will bless you. Which suggests that the relationship between these two lines is they're sort of saying the same thing. It says you find good equals being blessed. And paying attention, careful attention to the word is the same thing as trusting in the Lord. In other words, this is huge in terms of for the people who are attending a school like Calvary, a seminary or a Bible college, or thinking about going to some sort of Christian ministry or studying the Word of God. The grave danger, I had a prof in seminary who used to say every semester in pretty much every class, There is no place on earth easier to lose your spirituality than a theological seminary, and I would add, or a Bible college or other Christian institution. Because you are taught the Bible every day, and you learn an awful lot about it. And you are able to parse the verbs and critique the sermons and say, oh, the pastor missed that. That was a present tense, and he treated it as if it was an aorist tense, and blah, blah, blah. And we can become really impressed with how much we know. And we can know an incredible lot about the Word of God, but not pay attention to it. Because when you pay attention to it, it changes you. And that is, paying attention to it here is that you're trusting what Yahweh says. You're trusting the Lord. Trusting in the Lord. And here's the problem. I can't trust in the Lord if I don't know Him. And of course I have to know about Him if I'm going to know Him. Or if I know Him, I'm going to know about Him. Every once in a while somebody says, I don't know anything about the Bible, but I know the Lord. And I said, no, you don't. You're making Him up. You have all sorts of crazy ideas about what God is like. Unless you got those ideas from the Bible, they're probably way out to lunch. But it means I can spend a great deal of time studying my Bible, and you can too, and come away as much of an idiot as I started. Not growing, not becoming wise, not becoming a success as a student of Scripture, because I'm not getting it. I'm not getting what the Bible, the primary thing the Bible should teach me, which is who God is and how He works, and what He wants, and a sense of who I am in relationship to God. And this proverb, I think, is talking about that. If you take the other approach to it, then you're saying that it's a little more, what's the word I want? Pedestrian, I guess. A little more wooden, two aspects of success kind of thing that works very well in advertisements and so forth. Number one, pay attention to what I say. Number two, trust God. But the connection between them is not a strong connection. I think that the verse is talking, if the word davar refers to the word of Yahweh, then the connection is very strong, and it is, and the two statements very consistently support one another. So that's what I think is going on here. All right, that's verse 21. And here we have a very interesting, well, this is easy. We've got one coming up where it's a little more difficult. L'chacham lev yikare navon umetek safatayim yosif lekach. All right, now literally, let's go very woodenly and then sort it out here. The first line here, to the wise of heart, to a wise person of heart. Notice that's a construct. The adjective here is defining a kind of person, and they says he has wisdom, and it's the wisdom of heart. So it's not just intellectual skill, it's skill of heart. Remember, that's what the word chacham means, is skillful. And then we have, notice the verb form. Kara means to call, but this is a nifel. And when you, yikra le is to pronounce a name on, to ascribe a name to something. We can in English, we can say ascribe a name to, or I can say call him, or name him. And the idea here is one wise of heart will be called navon. Navon is the nifal of the verb bin, which means discerning. We get the preposition bain from it, the idea of between, and it kind of gives us a sense of how this works. A person who is navon, he understands how to find distinctions. He can see differences and analyze them. He's discerning. And so that you say, and he says, and a discerning person who can make the fine distinctions, which actually are absolutely necessary in our lives. You've probably heard this before in a sermon or a chapel message or around a campfire or something, that or maybe in an ethics class here on campus. The real problem in ethics is not good versus evil. It is good versus better, or better versus best. How do I, what do I have to do? I had a philosophy professor when I was in college back in the 1960s. His name was Patrick Romanell. You can look him up. He exists, Romanell. He's now dead, and I don't know. I want to say he's with the Lord, but I don't know. He came so close at one point. I said he could sneeze and fall into heaven, but he never made, to my knowledge, made a commitment to Christ, although after that time after that series of months and years actually that I talked with him on and off, he lived another 20 years, so there's no telling what God may have accomplished in those 20 years. It certainly would not break my heart to arrive in heaven and be greeted first by Patrick Romanell. I would think it would be the greatest joy in my life. Although I'm thinking seeing Jesus would be pretty big too, so maybe I better be smart off, not say stupid things without thinking. But anyway, the point is, he said his ethical system he called the problem of what was the tragic side of life. That's what he called it, the tragic side of life. This is when you have two equal goods. A woman in this would have been about 1969, I guess, or summer of 67 probably. And he says, as a woman who has gotten a scholarship to go to medical school, and the same week she gets a proposal of marriage, and the man has a career and he can't move to Harvard, to Boston. So it's like, well, if you're gonna marry me, you've got to stay here. Maybe you can take some other courses or something, but you've got to stay here. And so you have to give up your Harvard education at Harvard Medical School if you want to marry me. And so she says, well, I really want to become the best doctor I can, and he says, well then, and the answer is, but I really want to marry you. And he says, those are horrible decisions to make that are part of life every day. We have to make those kind of decisions. Well, guess what? The Bible recognizes that. He says, a person who makes those kind of decisions has to be discerning. They have to be able to sit down and say, what really solves this problem? Now, a big part of that is, what is God? I mean, the essence of it really is, what is, for a Christian, is easy. The concept is easy, the practice is not, but the concept is simple. It's, what is God's will? Did God call me primarily to be a medical doctor, or to be to marry this guy? Speaking as a woman, of course. I'm speaking for the woman, because that was the example he gave in class. And he said, oh, if I know God's will on the matter, I've got it. But figuring out God's will in something that the Bible doesn't expressly say, that's tough. And what's the secret? You have to be the right kind of person. And he says, that's the person who's wise of heart. They're skillful in the way their mind and emotions and every aspect of their being works. In other words, what we often say, and we take James, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God. And that's right. But they miss the point. Nobody gets wise. Nobody prays for wisdom today and gets wisdom today. What people usually say is, Lord, make me wise enough to make the decision in the next 10 minutes. And that's not wisdom. God may give you the right answer, but that's an answer. Wisdom is the skill to make that decision and be right most of the time. And to do that to become that person takes time. It takes the grace of God too. Proverbs 2 tells us that wisdom comes from the Lord and no other place. You'll never get it. But it's also, we're told over again, it's going to be something you have to put effort into and time into. And that's what we're saying. If you are wise of heart, then you are better able to make those kind of really, really difficult decisions. What's better? What's worse? What's better? What's best? Which is the best choice? And I would add, make those choices and then live with them. Some of the hardest things most difficult circumstance, emotional things I've watched people live with is they make a decision and spend the rest of their life wondering if they made the right one. You know, two roads diverge to yellow wood, and they keep thinking maybe I should go back and get on that other road. And to be truthful, as you get older, my age, I'm 71 almost. I'm 71 and a half now. But it's easy to look back and think, what if I had done this? You know, I was in Vietnam. I was offered a chance to go volunteer, and that would have made more money, and I would have been able to, you know, do this and this and this, and I'm good. But then I wouldn't have gotten this and this and I can play that game usually in the, you know, at night while I'm asleep, waking up in the middle of the night, or to go to the bathroom, or getting up just before I get up in the morning, working up, and now this game will start playing. What if, you know, I remembered something in a dream or something. Now I'm trying to play that what if game, and at one point I finally say, there's no point in a what if, because every one of those what ifs leads immediately into Never Never Land, a situation where I can never know. But you have to but when the time comes, you have to decide which of those two roads in the wood are you going to take. And as this poem says, as Robert Frost's poem at the end says, it makes all the difference. Each one of those choices we make leads us in a direction that will not allow us to go back and undo the choice. Some of them are huge. Who you marry is going to be tremendously important. But even little things. How much money, you know, I just got, everybody in America who paid income tax or whatever, probably you too, got a nice check from the government. Now, if you don't have any debts to pay because you've been smart with your money and so forth, you say, I got this $1,200 or $2,400 if you're married with somebody else, and we do this, and then so you say, well, we could spend that money on this. We could buy a new car, or we could move into a bigger apartment. We could do this, we could do that. And then the question is, okay, you make that choice, which is really not a big choice, you know, where you live, what you drive, you know, unless a month from now, some big bill comes due, something happens, and you have a big bill. And instead of having the money in savings, you have it in a car that depreciated the moment it drove off the lot, and you can't sell it without staying in debt. And so I'm in debt for the car, and I've got this other big debt, and the money is gone. Now, what? I made that little choice, and now it's having a big impact. We have to make these kind of choices. All right. To the one wise of heart will be called, or the one wise of heart will be called a discerner. He says he will be able to make those choices, and other people will recognize it. And then we have verse 21. He says, methek is what's driving me crazy and a half here. Sweetness of lips, methek is construct here, and sweetness of lips adds persuasiveness. Now, here's the problem with this verse. Both of those statements are pretty straightforward and pretty obvious and pretty easy to understand. A wise person who thinks well and wisely in all that we can say about wisdom, the wisdom of God who's working in him, he's going to make the kind of decisions that other people recognize him as being a discerning person. He can, and while he can't predict the future, he can anticipate the best choices to make in anticipation of any future. So he's ready as he can be in any situation. That's the kind of people come to him and look for help from him. How'd you decide that? What should I do? And then in this second part of the verse says something that's also equally pretty straightforward and obvious experientially, which is sweetness of lips. If someone is eloquent, is able to speak clearly and in an interesting way, it adds lekach. Now, lekach is a problem word. It comes from the lekach, obviously, the verb to take. And so people say something like, I think the King James translates it doctrine or something, or teaching. The word, though, if we do a word study on it, it seems to be, and it's really a difficult word study to come down with anything absolutely certain. but it seems to have the sense of having an effect of other people being willing to take what you say and listen to you. And so he adds persuasiveness. That's how I translate it. Sweetness of lips adds persuasiveness. Now the question is, okay, that's true. People are much more likely to listen to someone who speaks well and follow his advice. Presumably this person who speaks well will be clear, he will be logical, and he will be, his words will be, I don't want to say entertaining, but pleasant to listen to. He says, okay, that's true. We know that. Now we're talking about lips in verse 21b, and we're talking about the heart in 21a. We're talking about being called a discerner in verse 21a, and we're talking about becoming more and more influential or persuasive in 21b. It seems that the relationship between and this is where you can play the game here. Are these just two facts that are just associated? You know, you want to be sharp in your heart and be good with your mouth. You know, is that what he's saying? If so, then we just have a list. Item 1, item 2. Two facts about being a successful communicator or being a successful wise man. It seems to me, though, that there is enough correlation here to be able to see something a little bit better than just a simple list. Because it's not that the one who is wise of heart is a discerner. It's he will be called a discerner. That's what somebody else says about him. And if he is persuasive, he is persuading someone else. So I think the two verses, putting the two lines together, we have to say something. Okay, what we really have in, see what I put finally down here, is, I don't want to call this a paraphrase or an amplification. It's really pretty close here. I think amplification is better. The second clause further clarifies and amplifies what's said in the first clause, the first line here. He says, all right, you have the right kind of heart, a wise heart. It's going to affect how you live, and people will recognize that you're a discerner. And because you're a wise of heart and a discerner, you will choose the best way of expressing yourself and therefore have a greater influence on those people. It is true, by the way, this goes all the way back to a guy by the name of Aristotle. He had what he called the ethical proof in his book on rhetoric, that one of the greatest needs, and this is really true for us as Christians, is to have a reputation which justifies people paying attention to you. If people don't like you, if people don't trust you, it doesn't matter how good your advice is. It's interesting, Demosthenes, one of the greatest, and some would say the greatest orator of ancient Greece, of the classical era of ancient Greece, he had a real problem. He kept trying to convince the people of Athens not to make treaties with or concessions to the new king Philip II of Macedon. He says, all he's trying to do is conquer us. Don't do it. And he was absolutely right. Everything he warned the Athenians about was true. Everything he said would happen, happened. He was dead on, and they wouldn't pay attention to him. Even though he was a great orator, and his Philippics are studied to this day. If you are going to be a lawyer or you're going to be a politician, you want to learn how to convince people. Here's some of the greatest speeches for convincing people that you're right. So he did a great job, except for one thing. Everybody in Athens knew he'd been bribed before. He'd been bribed to misrepresent the truth. So it didn't matter how great his oratory was. He wasn't persuasive because he wasn't the right kind of person. And I think that's what we're looking here at verse 21. It says, first, be the right kind of person. If you want to be really a person who matters in terms of the people around you, you need to be the right kind of person, wise of heart, and be skillful in your language. Sweet lips, sweetness of lips. Anyway, that's what I think is going on here, and that's my logic in making that decision. By the way, notice something. I'm taking a great deal of time arguing these things back and forth. What we have to fight, especially in the Proverbs, is the idea to jump to a conclusion. We translate and say, oh, I know what that means. So stop and say, what does it really say? How do these lines really relate to each other? And fight it out. Work out an interpretation. Don't assume one. One of the greatest problems, I'm a lover of the Proverbs, writing my doctoral dissertation on the Proverbs. I wrote my master's thesis on the Proverbs. I spent a great deal of time teaching the Proverbs. I fought to get the book of Proverbs as a course on this campus because I think it's really important because it's so practical and so useful. But the greatest problem is most people treat Proverbs as if they're a snap. It's easy. It just means that. And the answer is, sometimes you're right. But quite often, you're not recognizing. This is a wise man's words. And therefore, you have to be wise to really understand what's going on. In a sense, that's one of the ways you become wise, is by wrestling through and figuring these things out, becoming discerning and skillful as you wrestle with the language. All right, let's take a look at verse 22. Makor Chayim, I should say, Sekel Ba'alau, Umusar Ewilim Iwelet. Now this is a fun proverb, and it really has some fascinating thoughts to it. But let's start off with, we got a figure of speech, Makor Chayim, a fountain of life. You may remember Christ talks to the woman at the well and talks about living water. And everybody loves that because it fits beautifully, and Jesus actually plays off of that to make the sense that a water that produces life, in this case eternal life. But there's another thing. There are two kinds of water in Israel today and in Canaan in ancient times. There is water that comes from a spring or runs in a river, and there is water that is collected in a what's the word I want? You to be my age, you'll love it. The word is right there. I can almost spell it, but I can't figure it out. But anyway, in a big cistern, there's the word I want. They would dig, they would excavate and carve into the limestone these big tanks, basically, and then they would cover it all up with stones, or sometimes they would dig caves and excavate them out. They would seal them inside with waterproof plaster, and then they would design trail or waterways and so forth, so that when it rained, the water would all run into these cisterns. Perhaps you've seen seen pictures of, and I've actually been to Masada. It is a fort that Herod the Great built right on the top of a big chunk of rock. I mean, literally, it just sticks right up out of the ground. It's got deep valleys all around it, cliffs on all sides, and he built this place up there to house a lot of people. The valleys below, by the way, are in desert right near the Dead Sea. So there's no wells, there's no springs, there's no river to gather water from. And you say, these people were living up there year round. How'd that ever happen? Well, Yigal Yadin, the man who excavated, he was an archaeologist as well as a military general in the Israeli army. He was the chief archaeologist, and he was the one who excavated Masada. And he talked about how they found, the place was filled with baths, Roman baths and ceremonial baths for Jews. And there was all these things that required water. And he says, and they kept thinking, how in the world do these have to, somebody go ride up several miles to the Jordan River, collect water and bring it back constantly? How would they do this? And how could this be a defense? All you had to do is put an army down below and the people would die. The Jews stayed up there for 4 years, waiting out the Romans before the Romans finally got to them and took them out without ever leaving. So how'd they do it? And they were confused and frustrated by it. And then during the winter, what we would call the winter time, there are big thunderstorms that come up in that region. And he says, and this huge thunderstorm came up, and they all ran for cover and got under cover, and the storm lasted about 20 minutes, just pelting the place with water. He says, when we came out after the storm passed, the first thing we noticed was there were almost no puddles. But the second thing was to discover that every place which was built for water, every one of the cisterns was full. All the water had been thrown into, and that's water. Now you can live on it. It's not as pleasant. Most of us recognize that we want spring water if we can get it. We want living water, water that is moving, because it collects air. It's not flat. And so water of life would be the most refreshing kind of water. So before we jump into the New Testament idea of water of life, meaning eternal life or something in Jesus' word, we have to look at it and say, all right, a spring of life that is a refreshing a fountain here, a fountain of life, I should say, brings this wonderful, refreshing water. And there's our word, their verb sakal again. We said we had to go back a few clicks here. And notice there, maskil. Well, here we have the verb sakal. Whoops, back one. And it's sekel, it's a noun. It says a fountain of life is the insight of its possessor. Baal means an owner. It can be an owner of a slave, or it can be owner of an animal. It can be owner of property. Baal. The word Baal in the Old Testament, Baal, is not really the name of a god. The god that is called Baal is the god Hadad, the storm god. But they called him Lord or Master. And so the name Baal came to have that specific application, especially in the books of Kings. They worship Baal. We find it also, or the Baalim, the lords. Hebrew had that word too, and so you have things like people who had the name Baal in their name. Later, the scribes fixed it, so you have Ishbosheth. His name was originally Ishbaal, and probably not named after a pagan god, as people like to say, but probably named for the Lord, recognizing the Lord as the Lord and Master of his life. He's a man of the Master. But because Baal came to be associated specifically with this one leading god of the Canaanites, Hebrew chose to use another word for the Lord, Adon. And even to the point where they took the name Baal and, as I said, put in Bosheth in these names in the book of Judges and Kings. That is scribes. Later scribes did. So we weren't giving the name of a false god when we read those chapters out loud. So this is using the word here of a possessor, an owner, master of it. He says, so the insight of its possessor is a fountain of life, a source of refreshing, living life. Life. And so the idea is, being a person who has real insight And previously we saw the insight was associated with the Word of God. It might be here too. He says, that insight for him is a great source of refreshment in life. It gives him a meaningful, full life. When I was in Army training, we had a responsibility one time, a duty training experience where we were following, it was called a map course. We had to get from point A to point B, or repeatedly move across about a 7-mile area with just a map and compass and check in at these various spots. And it was 110 degrees out and about 85% humidity, as I recall. It was a terrible. We were the only ones on the entire base that were allowed to train because of the threat to life. I always liked the fact that we were expendable. We were officer trainees. But anyway, the point is, we're walking, and because of a really major mistake, we didn't get water. I had a canteen, and when I started, I had about a quarter of a cup of water for an entire afternoon out in the sun, wearing a pack and a hot steel helmet on my head. I mean, it got hot from the sun. And I can tell you, when I finally got through and we finally got to water, we finally got to fluid, we had a great meal, and none of us could eat it. All we could do was drink. Oh, it was so refreshing. And he says, that's what it is to have insight. Oh, it just makes life worth living. Okay, what about the alternative? He says, but the discipline of fools is folly. Now at first, and you will even find commentators say, well, that's just a stupid thing. There must be something wrong because that makes no sense at all. There must be a word that's been lost. But it does. It makes perfect sense. Foolish people experience the results of their foolishness. Fellow in my church when I was pastoring here in Kansas City, he and his wife were up to their ears in debt, and he got an income tax refund because they had a lot of kids, and they got a lot of money because they didn't make much, and they got much extra money from the government because they were so poor. And the next Sunday after he got that check, I happened to be there when his wife praying for the family. I'd gone with a friend to minister to the family as a pastor, and I was praying with her when the check came. So I knew they'd just gotten the check. And the next Sunday they arrived at church in their brand new truck that was, the down payment took everything that they had just gotten from the federal government. And they had that truck for 2.5 months before it was repossessed. And so now they didn't have the truck. They traded in their old truck. They had no truck, no way to transport them and their children around. So his wife had an old junky car she used to go to work. And that was it. It was too small for the kids to have all the kids that they had transported in it. And they had the extra truck, and they had all the extra payments because they still owed on the truck. When they returned it, when the truck was repossessed, of course, since it was a brand new truck, the instant it crossed off of instant they signed the contract for that truck, the truck became half as valuable. And you won't believe how little when you don't pay anything on it, and they sell that truck for half, so that was tacked on to this huge debt. And then they came to us, begging, what can you do? People got to come up with stuff to pay our bills. And the answer is, no, the folly of fools is, the discipline of fools, the way they learn is by experiencing the effects of their own folly. But that's set in contrast to the fountain of life, because the folly of fools makes life miserable. They do the stupid things that bring more trouble into their lives and a frustration into their lives and futility into their lives. And says, which do you want to be? And remember, the book of Proverbs puts those contrasts, A or B. We know that there's some middle ground, and the wise man knew that too. And that's dealt with really largely in another one of Solomon's books, the book of Ecclesiastes, where he talks about the fact that life isn't neatly black and white. But here he says, from a standpoint of you're making decisions about life, says, which do you want to be? Someone who has the refreshment of discernment, of insight, being able to make the right choices at the right time in the right way, and in the right proportion? Or do you want to just keep messing up and having to suffer the consequences of it? In short, your life is there. All right, verse 23. And this will bring us within 10 verses of where we're going to finish, and I'll try to go faster from now on. Verse 23. Lev hacham yaskil pihu wa'al safatau yosif lechach. There's our lekach again, that we saw back in verse 21, persuasiveness. And notice, it's exactly, I'm pointing, you can't see it. Safatayim Yosef lekach in verse 21, and it's Safatau Yosef lekach in verse 23. And verse 21 begins talking about the Hacham Lev. This deals with the Lev Hacham. Now, Lev Hacham in isolation, since Lev can be either an absolute or a construct noun, they both have the same pointing, they both have the same vowel pattern. This could either be the wise of a wise heart or the heart of a wise man. And to know which it is, we have to just consider the rest of the statement. Yaskil, and there's our word again, sakal, teaches in this case, or makes successful his mouth. So the heart, a wise heart makes successful his mouth. Well, if it's a wise heart, whose mouth? No, it's the heart of a wise man makes his mouth successful. What's the secret to a wise man being effective as a speaker? And the answer is he has a wise heart. His heart is wise. So the heart of a wise man, his thoughts, make his mouth successful. And on his lips, or to his lips, he adds persuasiveness. It adds persuasiveness. The heart adds persuasiveness. So the subject is Lev Hacham, the heart of a wise man, in the first clause in verse 23, and then it's the subject of the second clause. And on his lips, and to his lips, it adds persuasiveness. And that's what is involved with a successful mouth. It says things that matter. It's interesting, if you'll notice here, there's an assumption made that is part of their culture which may not be made in our culture, and that is that being a wise man involves communicating ideas, communicating truth, specifically communicating wisdom. Let's see, how am I doing here? Did it ring on me? Well, it would be helpful if I'd started it, wouldn't it? That's why it didn't stop. All right, I'll start it next time. Right now, we'll go to verse 24 when we come back, and we'll finish up this chapter and look at the rest of these Proverbs when we do. We'll see you I'll see you at 8. All right, rolling on now. Let's see if we can't get through this here. And I did it in Southern. All right. We just dealt with that, so I can move on. All right. Suf Davash Imre Noam. Makoch Lanefesh Umape La'atzim. La'atzim. I'm sorry. All right. It is a comb of honey, or a honeycomb of honey, are words of pleasantness. And then we have supplementary sweetness to life, the nefesh, and health to the bones. I should say to the life. Notice these are definite articles there. La nefesh and la atzim. To the bone. The bone referred to our physical life. The nefesh here would be referring to life in general, but probably specifically to our mental life. But notice we have three clauses here. The way I define it, every time I have a new predicate, I treat it as a new clause. And our subject of the first clause is the very first line. And we begin with a predicate, suf davash. And you might notice that I understand this as a predicate, it's a figure of speech. It turns out that words, pleasant words, or words of pleasantness, and by the way, easy to remember pleasantness, noam, think of Noami or Naomi, the pleasant one. Well, that's right. Words of pleasantness are a honeycomb. Well, they aren't. I've eaten honeycomb, I've seen honeycomb, and it doesn't look at all like words of pleasantness. But it does have the same effect as words of pleasantness. Honeycomb is sweet and enjoyable. And he says, and pleasant words have that same effect. Someone who speaks with pleasant words. And Imre Noam is not only the subject of the first clause, it's the subject of the two following clauses, which are found in the second part of the verse. So the first thing the words of pleasantness are the figure of speech. They are honeycomb. Or we might even put a little parenthesis in there, like honeycomb. And then the second part tells us how they're like honeycomb. What does honeycomb do for us? Well, it adds sweetness to life. So honeycomb makes life is sweet, makes life better. I'm guilty of this. I suspect you are too. When things are not doing well, you want to pick up a candy bar or grab a mint or something. Just putting something sweet in your mouth, it kind of refreshes you. It's like, okay, everything's not miserable. I can have sweetness. But it's not just that it's sweet. It gives you energy. And so it makes you, actually gives you more strength. It's good for you. And he said, honey was also, they recognized the effect of honey. When people ate honey, they became stronger. Think about David and, or I shouldn't say David, Jonathan. He and his father are in a battle, and the father says, for fear that his men would go to plundering rather than finishing the battle, he gave an order that anyone who ate or drank anything before the battle was won would be executed. And Jonathan wasn't there to hear it. So he goes into battle, and Israel is losing the battle, and he goes to fighting, and in his way, he's going along, and he sees a honeycomb, and he reaches out with his spear, and he grabs it into that beehive, and he pulls back a big chunk of honeycomb, and he eats it, and it refreshes him, and he goes and leads the day. He saves the day. The battle is won because of him. Yeah, because that's what honeycomb do. It gave him a burst of energy. And he says, it's good for you. And it feels good too. And what is good for you and feels good too? Words that are pleasant. There is a huge implication here for most of us, that we are much more likely to lecture harshly when we're trying to do something than be pleasant in what we have to say. Pleasant words are words that make the other person feel good. Now, we got to say, that's a simple fact of life that he's laid out for us. It isn't always possible to do that. I mean, the prophets, the Apostle Paul, others were really ready to go right in your face and tell you where you're wrong. Because it had to be. So it isn't a law that says we must always be pleasant in our speech, because people will also not listen to pleasant words if they are communicating an idea they don't want. But all things being equal, if I can say it pleasantly, it's much better than if I yell it. Years ago, I demonstrated this in a children's message in my church here in Kansas City when I was still pastoring. And I was dealing with a boy that, a fellow that had all the kids. I bring him up and I do it. And I looked at him and I said, I think you're terrific. And I yelled at him, I think you're wonderful. And the kid nearly went hysterical. I didn't intend that. Well, it turns out he was the victim of abuse. His father had broken his arm, twisting his arm, and all the time telling him how much he loved him and how he really cared about him while he was beating the kid up and breaking his bones. And yeah, okay. If I yell at my wife how much I love her, she's not likely to listen to me. She's not likely to believe it. We need to, as much as possible, make our words match our feelings if we want to be heard, and especially pleasant words. All right, moving on, because I can't take the time I'd like to. Yesh derech yashar lifnei ish, wa acharitha darkei mawet. There is a way that is literally straight or upright, is the way it's usually translated in the Proverbs. There's a way that is straight or upright before a man, that is in his eyes, from his perspective. But its ends, and lifnei is before, acharei is after. This is not acharei, but we get it. There is looking ahead, it seems like the right thing to do. Looking back, we discover it was the wrong thing to do, because it's ways of death. Now, what's he saying? The two things here we have to do is, what's going on here? It's pretty straightforward. We already know. There's a way that seems right to a man. That's the King James translation, and it works. It's pretty straightforward here. What's he saying is, what we think is the right thing to do isn't always the right thing to do. In fact, there is a way which looks good and goes bad, very bad. So the thing is here, is it doesn't say there's a way that seems right to a fool. It's to a man. He says it's talking about the limitations of human understanding here. It's not talking about being the right kind of person. If you're a really godly person, the right way will always be the right way. No. Several years ago, there was an incredible scam that was foisted upon upon some churches, but mostly Christian educational institutions. It was tight. Funds were tight for pretty much everybody. And there was a man who talked about his incredible Christian love for the Lord and how he wanted to help people. And God had given him special skill in business. And he had a way of knowing how to make the right investments. And he would make investments for these people. And they were making, when most people were making like 1% a return, he was making 10, 20% for people. For various institutions, and school after school, evangelical school after evangelical school of higher education was handing their investment portfolio over to him, the money that they had in escrow or they had deposited on background, they would hand over to him to make money for them, and it was working for a while. You can pretty well figure out if you know much about what's going on. It turned out it was a Ponzi scheme. Every time he got a new investment portfolio, he would pay everyone else a big dividend, and they would cheer and be excited and say, "No, keep the money, make more, make more. The Lord's blessing us," and he would always give the Lord glory for it. And he was a crook the whole time. And when I heard about it, I was of course on campus at that time, and Calvary from what? I came to campus in 1982, and at least for 20 years before that, there was the rumor going around that Calvary was going to close the next fall because the finances weren't there. And we've gone, that's not even true in this terrible time right now, but that rumor hangs over our heads like the sword of Damocles for years and years and years. And it was true that we had really difficult times financially during the 1980s and 90s and into the early 2000s, but particularly in the late 80s, early 90s. And that's when this hit, and when this scam was being perpetrated. And when I heard about it, and they were talking about how the numbers were so much greater than the average, and I have a brother who's an investment banker, and I said, well, that's crazy. If the numbers don't make sense, that's almost always crooked. And I mean, I know the Lord is great and He do wonderful things, but that's normally, get rich quick is not God's normal way of doing things. And I said, I can't believe that they were so stupid as to get involved in that. And I just mouthed off at a faculty meeting during a break, and the guy next to me said, shut up. The board of the school was 1 week away from signing the papers to do it for Calvary. That would have killed us. Oh, wow. What are we looking at verse 25? It looks so good. It was the Lord blessing. And by the Lord's blessing this man and enabling him to provide, we were going to double our capacity. We were going to make great progress. Everything was so wonderful. Boom! And it was heading us right into this disaster. If God had not had the guy get caught when he did, we would have been caught too. We would have been bankrupt. By the way, it explains why certain Christian publishing companies stopped publishing new books. They didn't. I don't know of any that actually went out of business, but they stopped publishing new books. Why? Because they didn't have any money left. One institution laid off 1/3 of its faculty. An old and well-established and highly recognized institution is still around, so I'm not going to name it. But the point is, it was horrible. And it looks so good. It's not, only fools and idiots. Although in this case, I'm sort of thinking, fools sort of makes sense. And I can say that to some extent because I have a brother who was offered a $250,000 a year bonus if he would sign on with a company down in Texas. And he walked away from it when he had been unemployed for a year. And I said, "Are you crazy? Why did you leave?" And he says, "The numbers don't make sense. There's something fishy about it." And if you want to find out what something that fishy was, just look up the word, do a quick search on Enron. He was offered a tremendous job at Enron. And it turned out Enron was crooked from the top to the bottom. And he looked at the numbers and they don't make sense. Wisdom. But here they say, what we think is going to make sense, is going to work. Most people don't have that kind of training. I know that. And I had certain insight because my brother told me. But most people don't have that. And they think they know what's going to go on. He says, no, you're a human being. The way that you think is going to go right may not go right. So we need to make all decisions with the idea, what if this is the wrong choice? How am I going to deal with it if this goes sour? We tend to usually make decisions going either or. Either I'm going to do it or I'm not. And the answer is, maybe we should start saying, so when I made a decision, I started saying, okay, what are the other alternatives if the situation goes south? What am I going to do then? That's what a wise man does. But that's not what man in general does. And he says, no, it's the way it seems right to a man. But it's into the ways of death. And it's the ways of death, not the way of death. Because we're not talking about spiritual or moral things exclusively. It's certainly true of those. But it's also true of life in general. And there are a variety of ways things can go bad. What looks like it's going to be perfect and tremendous can turn out to be a big disaster, a big failure. Again, sort of picking on my own institution. When I I came in 1982 to Calvary, as I said, and that was the year until a year ago or 2 years ago. That was the year Calvary had the biggest student population it ever had up to that point. It then went down after that and stayed down until, as I said, a couple of years ago, we actually went past that number. So Calvary's doing fine. I'm not bad-mouthing them. But I saw something which is very interesting. In preparing some work, I was in a storage room, and they had a chart that had been prepared for a board meeting, apparently, or perhaps for investors who wanted to support the school. I don't know. But it was a chart, and it showed the progress, the change, how from the low time in the 1970s when the school came very close to losing everything because they had such a low student population, it just went up and up and up. And it came to 1982, and what I know is in 1982 the thing went like this because it was the end of the baby boom, and there were literally a third as many people going to college for the next few years. But the chart didn't do that. The chart was written in 1982, and it showed the projected, and it said that by 1988, Calvary would have over 1,000 students. Well, guess what? By 1988, we had about 350 students, which was roughly 200 students less, almost 200 students less than at its peak time. It looked like that was what was going to happen. And what I know, because I was here, is because everyone was so excited about how Calvary was growing, nobody was saying, and what happens if it doesn't work? What happens if the baby boom, when the baby boom ends, we have a loss of students? What happens if we don't? He says, no. He says, that's a little lesson. There is a way that looks good. The fact that it looks good doesn't mean it is good. All right, I'll move on because it's terrible to, you can see I really, really want to eat all of these things up. All right, verse 26. Nefesh amala lo, ki akaf alau pihu. All right, the literally says, I'm going to use nefesh and use the traditional translation because we have to figure out what it means here. Just so this. The nefesh of a laboring man labors for him. Or the nefesh of a laborer, let's put it that way, labors for him. Why? Because his mouth urges him on, presses on him. Now, in this case, nefesh seems to have the idea, as most translations have it, the appetite, the hunger. It says the appetite of a laborer labors for him because his mouth presses him on. I worked for my father as a common laborer for, I guess it was, probably all 4 years in the summers when I was in high school. And I mean, I did real work. I dug ditches and carried heavy objects. I remember putting, back then, the sacks of cement came in 96-pound sacks, and I would carry 2. At one point, my dad said, carry them both on your right shoulder. And I said, no, put one on each shoulder. That way I can damage my spine equally as I walk. But I did. And I can tell you something. In the heat of the summer in El Paso, Texas, which is pretty much like the heat of the summer in southern Palestine, in southern Israel today, and in biblical times, it's miserable to work out in the open. It's tiring. You sweat like a pig. Your body just wilts under the heat. You get thirsty. And he says, but think about it. If you're doing that kind of a job, and you're not going to eat unless you finish the job and get paid. In other words, I'm not up to this, so I'm going to take the rest of the day off. And you take the rest of the day off and you don't get paid. Because you contracted, the rule was you got paid at the end of every day. And so he says, and that's the background to this thing. He says, yes, it's a hard thing when you have something really, really hard to do. The fact, he says, and he uses the labor, something that pretty much nobody says, you know, when I grow up, I want to be a common laborer. I want to dig ditches in the sun. I want to work as a roofer's assistant on top of a roof. Those are hard and exhausting and stressful jobs. In some cases, very dangerous jobs. And they take a lot out of you physically. But you do it because you don't want to die of starvation. You had to work to eat. And he says, that's the thing. Now, what's he showing? He's giving us a very specific example, like a stitch in time saves 9 here. What's the more general principle he's saying here? He's saying, look, if you have a really, really distasteful task, you've got to find, and it's not, I will take this online test, and afterwards I'll have a cup of coffee, or I'll have a candy bar, or I'll reward myself. I don't think that's what he's saying, because here it's saying, no, figure out what it is, why this task has to be done in order to accomplish what you really need in life, or what you really want in life. Yeah. I have to take this exam, otherwise I flunk this course, and if I flunk this course, I'm not going to get a degree. If I don't get a degree, there's a reason for me to go ahead and do this. And it's not, I'm working up some sort of artificial motivation. He's saying the motivation is built in the problem itself, in the situation, its own situation. All right. Oh, I'm already done. Oh, that's right. I didn't do this one. I should have. It gave me all of them. So we're now to verse 27, aren't we? And we have a word that is a little thing. It says, Ish Balial. Balial. Kore Ra'ah. Now, Balial is Belial. In the New Testament, the word Belial has become a name that the Jews used for Satan. So he's called Belial, and that's the devil. In the Old Testament, that's not what's going on. The word Belial means worthlessness. A man of worthlessness is a worthless person, a person who has no benefit to anyone. He says, Kore Ra'ah. What does he do? A worthless person digs out evil. Now, in this case, we have to turn around and say, you know what? He who digs out evil is a worthless person, is the idea here. So this Ish Balial is the predicate. The subject is Kore Ra'ah. Again, the member set. The set here is worthless people, a worthless man. And this is one kind of worthless person. And what does he do? He's a troublemaker. And he goes and finds he makes trouble by finding bad things. He's the kind of he's a gossip is one kind of person who does this. He gossips about people. He searches the internet to find faults in other people. He takes a perspective to make it happen. That's the point here. He's a troublemaker. He says, that's a worthless person. He has nothing to contribute. He is of no benefit to anyone. Hint, don't be one. I've known Christians who think that they're wonderful people because they go out and find out all the things that are wrong with people because that's their job. The Lord has given them the ministry of doing this. And the answer is that's not a ministry. It's a sin. It's an arrogant act, and it makes you a worthless person. And then he says, let's see, verse 27 is, Wa'al sifatao ka'esh zaravet. And you go, and on his lips, is like a scorching fire. In other words, now, how is it honestly? He has burning lips, passionate. No. A scorching fire is no good. It doesn't do. You don't cook over a scorching fire. A scorching fire is too hot. It's a damaging fire. That's all it's. And so he said, a scorching fire says, He digs up trouble and he spreads it around, and he's a worthless person. But people love to listen to him, as long as he's talking about somebody else. We all love to see how other people are bad. We don't have to go any further than to watch the news. Watch, you can check this. Something happens. There's some sort of disaster. There's a fire or a bomb threat or something, and somebody rushes into a building. Just an average guy, not one of the first responders, but an average guy rushes into that building and saves someone or drags some things out. And he'll be reported one day, and they'll tell about what a great hero he is. And then in a day or two, somebody will have dug up the fact that, he has a criminal record, and he's wanted by the police, and you go, okay, that is interesting, but wait. Why is that important? Because I don't want people to be successful. I want to find fault, because I can sell that. The news is based on people wanting that. He says, but if we could just get in our heads, the person who spends their whole lives looking for trouble and looking to stir up trouble is a worthless person, not worth paying attention to. I don't know why I grabbed that up. It's all still sitting there. That was verse 27. Verse 28. Ish ta have pukot ya shalach madom. Wanirgan mafri al-luf. All right. No section. I should do this. Yeah, after verse 28. Interesting. It says, a man of perversity, of twists, if you will, in plurals. He says, he sends out trouble. Trouble's not the right word. He sends out strife. My one translation has unleashes strife, and that's sort of so we have a worthless person digs up trouble and talks about it. A crooked person, a person who isn't morally straight, he stirs up trouble. And Nirgan, the rest of the verse, it says, and a gossip, that's the Nirgan, separates close friends. Now, I have a very clear illustration of this. I'll go very quickly with it, I hope, because I don't want to lose all my time, but there's some things that are really perfect for this. A member of my wife and I, when I came back from Vietnam, my wife and I had only been married 3 months before I went overseas. And then I spent 7 months overseas, and I came back, and I couldn't get a job right away. Part of it was was coming down off of the war, and I didn't know, something about coming back and not being a hero, being treated as a murderer, even though I only kept an office while I was overseas. People avoiding me and all bugged me, and I had to work through that. And also, there were a lot of guys getting out of the service at that time, and so there weren't that many jobs. And so it took me about 6 months to finally get a job, and that put strain on my wife's and my relationship, because I didn't know my wife real well. And she didn't know me very well, and we're kind of getting used to each other, and it was a very stressful time. And leaving church one Sunday, my wife's grandmother we were giving her a ride home. And she was sitting in the back seat, and my wife and I were in the front seat. And it was my wife's church, and I was, and I'd been there a few weeks, a few months, but I wasn't dear friends with anyone yet. And so she was taking her time talking. She loved to do that. She was talking to people and everything else, and I was getting frustrated because I have this woman sitting in the car, and I'm trying to get my wife. And so when she gets in, I'm testy. I'm a little irritated, about it. And I make a remark about, you could have gotten here sooner. I mean, she shoots back. And she takes a shot across the bow. And we make a couple of nasty remarks, and then I say, wait a minute. this is ridiculous. And I start trying to make peace. And the next thing I know, I'm jumping on her again. And I'm angry with her again. And then she tries to make peace. And then she's on me again. And back and forth. And all of a sudden, I hear from the back seat a giggle. Her mother-in-law was sitting in the back seat just laughing her head off at us. And I knew that she and her husband had a terrible marriage. They were married for 55 years, and they decided they had no love for each other within the first 5. And they basically lived separate lives in the same household for that entire time. And she's giggling, and as I started listening, I suddenly remembered, I go back. Every time we tried to make up and get back together on the even keel, she would start throwing out reasons for us to fight. And I would say things like, "You're right, dear. I overreacted. This is ridiculous." And she'd say, "So she's the boss, huh? Stir up trouble." Because she wanted to see us fight. She wanted to prove that there was no such thing as continuing love between husband and wife. That her experience was normal experience. She was a worthless person. She was a crooked person. All right. Verse 29. Oh, I don't remember. Did I talk about aloof? Yeah, aloof is close friends. It's interesting. Aloof also is used of a ruler. Not what's the word I want. A commanding officer is an aloof in a military situation. So these are people, chief friends might be the best way to translate that. All right, verse 29. Ish Hamas Yafete, I'll say it right. Re'ehu Waholiko Baderek Lotov. A violent man. So we're getting a list of bad guys. We have a worthless man. We have a crooked man. We now have a violent man, a man of violence. What does he do? Well, you might be surprised. He entices. There's a thing here called the simple man. He tricks people. He tricks his friend. He entices his friend. And walks him. This is the verb halak in the hifil. And walks him in a way that's not good, a bad way. He says, there's a way that seems good to a man, but a way that seems upright to a man, but the ends are evil. And this is a guy who says, let's help you get on that bad way. He finds a way to help you, trick you into believing you're doing right. This is the guy who who is kind of the backup singer for the gossip. The gossip tells you somebody said terrible things about you, and he says, that's right, yeah. And he tries to help you go the wrong way. He says, notice what the proverb's saying is, a wise man has to have the sense to recognize the kind of people they're dealing with. Check their character before you listen to what they have to say or follow the example they want you to follow. All right, verse 30. Otse enau lach shov ta hapuchot koretz safatal kila ra'ah. It says one winking, literally it says pressing his eyes, winking his eyes is pretty good here. Winking or squinting his eyes is planning perversity, and one pressing his lips is completing evil or completes evil. And you say, what's this talking about? It's basically talking about you can tell something when you see somebody, the way they behave. You can see people, and the expression on their face can often tell you, this guy's up to no good. It's possible, and this is one of the things that's often said, that the winking of the eyes was a signal, signaling trouble, and pressing the lips. But that's kind of the look of somebody who's going, mm-hmm. In fact, I'm thinking of that lieutenant in Vietnam. One of the first things that I remember, one of the things I remember most about him and knowing he was about to be tricked was when he decided that he wasn't going to take this other guy's trouble. He did this first. He goes, He's figuring out how he can get out of not having to do this, even though, thinking he's being really smart, but he's being really foolish. But he says that's what you see somebody who's going, he's making trouble. Now, this is not a rule. What it's saying, it's not like, every time you see somebody go, that means they're bad, or that means they're bad. What it's saying is, pay attention. Get to know the people that are around you and figure out who you can listen to, who you can trust, and who you should avoid, or who you should ignore. It's real simple. The concept is simple. In actual practice, however, we have a nasty habit of listening to the wrong people and following the wrong examples. All righty. That's verse 30. Let's go all the way to verse 31. I can start to this again now. Only 3 more to go. We're good. All right. Ateret, tiferet, seva, baderek sabaka, timatzah. All right. Great. I love this one. Great. It literally says, a crown of beauty or splendor is a gray head or gray hair, if you will. Gray hair, seva, is an ateret, tiferet. Now, let's start with a crown here. The ateret is not a royal crown. It's not you become a king. You have authority or power. It is a crown that is given to someone for adornment, and it's generally, in this context, I think almost certainly, an award, or it is well, in the entertainment industry, you have both for the Oscars and the Emmys, you get lifetime achievement awards, where somebody says, well, this person never really got the recognition they deserved, and they spent their lifetime and made a major contribution that was never been acknowledged, so we want to acknowledge it. And basically what this is saying is gray hair is a lifetime achievement award. It's found in the way of righteousness. Now, timatzeh, the subject is the eferet, eret. And they say, it is the sheba, the gray head. And it says the gray head is found among those who, in the way of righteousness. Now, it is not, this proverb, again, Proverbs do not state laws of nature or moral laws of the universe. They state general principles. And what they're basically saying, if you want to have a long life, be a good person. Now, we can all go through history and find bad people, immoral people, disgusting people who had a long life. I mean, you don't even have to go through history. In the morning, I don't watch it, but in the morning on the Today Show, they have a segment where where Smuckers has people who are over 100 years old. They say who're celebrating their 100th birthday or more, and they will talk about it. We'll name them and honor them, and often the person will add a little piece of information. And Sarah is 103 today, and she attributes her long life to the fact that she reads her Bible every day and drinks nothing stronger than milk, and prays and goes to bed at 8:30 every night, and after praying for half an hour. And then here's Frank. Frank is 107, and Frank attributes his long life to drinking a fifth of whiskey every night and smoking 10 cigars a week. And you go, I don't see the pattern. And the answer is, if you do that, you can say, oh, I can always find the exception. I can always find people that are bad. The proverb is not saying if you live a good life, you will live long enough to have gray hair. But what it's saying is, if you want to live a long life and have gray hair, the smart thing is to live a good life. Now, part of this is just simple practicality. There are people I went to college with, and others I don't know of who I went to the Vietnam with, who are dead because they got involved in drugs. The 60s were big on drugs, and in Vietnam there was a tremendous drug market. It was a terrible scourge that we had to fight all the time, and in a lot of different ways. But people got involved in it, and they didn't see gray hair. When this was pointed out, people taking PCP and LSD, which blows and literally destroys your mind, it pointed out to people, a slogan came up, which is, I want to die looking good. I want to die before I'm 30. And a lot of them got their wish. I didn't do that. I never drank. I never smoked. I never did drugs. And look at me, got gray hair. Well, yeah, there may be more to it than that. But the point is, there are some things which are just that simple. You do incredibly foolish things and wicked things. It can cost you. You get involved in bank robbery. Somebody's liable to shoot you. You join a gang. You might get killed. Those are the kinds of things. But there's more to it. He says, you live a good life. It changes your perspective on things. It means you're going to have a better attitude. He's just saying the best way to have a long life is to live a righteous life. And then, even if it turns out your life isn't so long, you die in your 20s, your 30s, it's still rich. You have lived a righteous life, and that means you've lived a beneficial life to others. So that when your life is over, people are not glad that you're gone. 32. We're almost to the end here. Tov Erek Afayim Mi Gibor U Moshel Barucho Mi Loked Ir. Better is one, and we have to say one. We have an adjective, Erek, which means to be long or lengthy or long. Better long of anger. Afayim literally means nose, long of nose, but it's not talking about being long-nosed physically. If you see somebody get angry, you can watch before they blow. You'll watch their nostrils flare as they're drawing in that deep air, trying to control themselves, and their nostrils. And he says, so the Jews knew that, and they said, so they used the word af for anger, for the kind of anger that goes boom, explosive. And he says, someone who can hold off before he explodes is better than a mighty man, than a war hero. And that's huge. That's in our world, because it's one of the things that we in the service, when I was in the service, one of the things we really hated about Hollywood movies. In fact, even certain Hollywood stars like Jimmy Stewart, who was a war hero from World War II, he refused to make movies about World War II because he said that Hollywood never gets it right. They always are insulting. And the reason is because they show war heroes as people who get angry and they become heroic. And the answer is, no one gets heroic when they're angry. They become stupid and dangerous. And he said, that's what he's saying. He says, no. He says, you go out and win a great battle, that's great. But if you can sit and and take it when somebody's insulting you and not blow it, not blow up, not lose it, not say things you shouldn't say, go out, if you can stay calm, he says, that's better than drawing your sword and charging up the hill and winning a great victory. And he reinforces it. And one ruling his spirit, in control of his thoughts, probably the best way to say it. The one ruling his spirit, Mosheel Barucho. He says, Me, he is better than Loked Ir, one who takes a city. He says, I don't know. Same thing. I don't know why I think about this. I think about a football player. We have a lot of the heroes in our culture now, these great football players. And then they do stupid things like beat up one of their wives or women or get drunk and so forth. And he says, so the guy can run fast and catch a pass and knock people down. If he could only control his temper, wouldn't that be... the little wimp that can control his temper is a bigger, stronger, better person. And we come to verse 33, which everyone has heard. B'chek yutal, et hagoral, ume Adonai kol mishpato. Now, what we have here is a return to the theme that sort of started the chapter, which is God, man but God. So it says, the lot, into the lap is cast the lot, is tossed the lot. The idea of the chik here is they wore these ropes, and they would take a wide band and they would fold it in half, like this, and they would wrap it around and it would be tied, and that meant you had basically a great, it'd be like this. And you had a great big pocket here. And you could put your hands in it and rest them while you're sitting or while you're walking if you wanted to. But you could also put other things there. And when a major decision comes and nobody could figure out, everybody said, well, on the one hand this, on the other hand that, on the one hand this, on the other hand that, and you end up with it equal. They say, well, if it's really equal, then we decide by lot. That's what happened in the upper room when they chose Matthias as the successor to Judas. They weighed out, they looked all the rules about who could be the one who would succeed Judas, and they said there are two that meet all the requirements. And we have no reason to decide we have no basis for deciding which one. So they cast lots. That's in the hands of the Lord. That's what they thought. So you go, now how do you do that? Well, you take a black stone, a white stone, or whatever, and you stick it down in the pocket, you move them around a little bit, and then you reach down in and pull it out. And whatever color stone you come, that tells you what the answer is. You flip a coin, if you will. So nothing can be more random than that, right? Except it turns out what is random for man is not random for God. It says, the lot is cast in the lap, but from Yahweh is all of its judgment, or its every judgment probably is a better way to translate this. Now what is he saying? He says, I don't like to say, people like to say this, people say, there's no such thing as chance. It's all God's will. And I know what they mean, and to some extent I agree with them. But I prefer to put it this way. God rules chance. God is sovereign over chance. Because the truth is, if I flip a coin 100 times, it will come out to about 50-50. And, so there's mathematically, chance can be mathematically measured and figured. If roll a dice 1 out of 6 times, it's going to come up 1, and 1 out of 6 times it's come up 6. And if I roll 2, there's a whole mathematical formula for that. If I have 3, there's a mathematical formula for that, and it works. It's consistent. So there seems to be something that's real about chance. But what else is real about chance is what is chance to me is under God's control. That means every time I flip a coin, every time, let's be blunt about it, every time there's a lottery winner, God made that decision. He's in charge. And so it's not, now this is not saying we ought to do that. God's in charge, so I'm going to play the lottery. No. Actually, the Proverbs, we don't have it here, but elsewhere in the Proverbs says, you don't want to get involved in get-rich-quick schemes. That's not God's way. God wants us to earn and work for our money, to do it right, gradually over time as much as possible. God will bail us out from time to time. We shouldn't get into gambling. But, that being said, gamblers are giving the benefit. Now, some people say, well, I can't believe you could say that. God would never, ever help some of these gamblers win these big amounts of money. And the answer is, who said that winning the lottery was a good thing? Remember, righteousness is better than wealth. Wisdom is better than wealth. So getting wealth, if you're a fool, is almost punishment in itself. Oh yeah, the punishment or the discipline of fools is folly. I think it's very interesting. The very first person was a woman to win $1 million in a lottery. Declared bankruptcy 2 years later, owing $2 million. She not only spent the whole million, or whatever was left of the million after taxes, but she had run up bills in excess of $2 million. Wow, I bet her life was really wonderful. My mother-in-law lived right next door to a woman, and I shouldn't put it that way. My mother-in-law and another woman lived right next door to each other. They had something in common. They both had their husbands die the same year, within a month of each other. The woman next door, her husband died in a swimming accident, presumably he drowned. And my mother-in-law's husband had a heart attack and died. Both of this is right after I got back from Vietnam. Literally a month after I got back from Vietnam. And you couldn't have a better contrast. My mother-in-law received and this was in 1972. Yeah, spring of 72. Mother-in-law received $100,000 life insurance. The other woman received $250,000 in life insurance, or maybe it was more than that. It may have even been $300,000. She got a big bunch. My mother-in-law sat down and worked out. She had 3 children living at home, an adult daughter who had a job, and 2 young children. My wife, of course, was living with me, duh. And so we weren't in the picture. But she said, I need to be able to fix it. So she fixed up the house, added a room actually to make sure they had enough space to allow for the kids to grow up, and then bought a new car because her car was about to go bad, and then put the rest of the money in long-term investments that paid off well at a time when long-term investments were paying like 20% because of inflation. And she would live on just whatever came in off of those investments every month, plus the Social Security that was paid to the kids. The woman next door, she spent all of her money, most of it gambling and drinking. She had 5 preschool children, or 5 children who were in elementary school or preschool. And she spent all of her money, wasted all of her money within a couple of years. No, not even a couple of years, within 12 to 18 months. And 18 months is probably a little too long. Because I know my wife and I ended up moving into her house a couple of years later. And she'd been gone for several months by that point. What happened? It was like, well, she had all that money. It was great. She had no idea what to do with it. So don't tell me, oh, well, you earn it and you have to pay your bills out of it. You learn how to do it right. Remember, the laboring man's mouth works for him. It helps. He learns what the value of things is. Get it free, you can throw it all away in no time. And so it's like that. That's it. The Lord is in control of chance. And that means when chance goes against you, you say, well, obviously God's got something going on. You know, something just seemed perfect, and then something bizarre happened. Again, one example from Calvary, and I'll let you go. In the late 1980s, about 1986, 87, the Air Force base that we're on the federal government was selling it. And Calvary, of course, had been renting the buildings at that point, and the city was buying, and the buildings were then gone to the city, and we started paying rent to the city of Kansas City until ultimately the city allowed us to buy it all about a year or two ago. It took us forever to get them, convince them to let go of it. But the chapel of the Air Force base, that had to, by law, be sold to a religious institution. And here was Calvary using that as their chapel. And we had been using it for as long as we'd been out on campus. That's since 1980. That's when the school moved out on the campus. So it had been a number of years. We had it all recorded. And another church in the area, very small church, only like 60 members, and this is a building that can comfortably seat about 300 to 350 people. Anyway, this other church, they put in a bid on it. They said it had to be given by the federal government. Well, there were two people in the chaplain's office, three people actually in the chaplain's office, who had looked into the situation. And they told our president, at that point was Leslie Madison, they told him, Calvary's the best choice for this. Calvary's going to get it. That's what the chairman, or what the head commander, the deputy commander, and the S1 in that unit all said. So we sent it up, and it was kind of like we're all, being told again, this thing is a wash. That's already been decided. We're going to get this chapel. It's going to be great. We'll own this chapel. It'll be marvelous. And the church that put in their thing, they said, well, we'll let Calvary use it during the week, and we'll just use it on Wednesday nights and Sundays. So I don't. Well, when the applications came in and the deadline for the applications came, the chief of chaplains, his deputy chief, and his S1 were all away on responsibility, and the decision had to be made. So the man who was in charge looked at it and says, oh, this works out well. Calvary can use it, the church can use it. Well, it turns out the church said Calvary could use it on condition that we paid their house payment. We paid the loan payment that they were going to make. In other words, you rent it for us at the price we'll pay. So we'll get the whole thing for free, and you'll pay for it, but it belonged to us. And so I remember our president was so furious and upset, he just couldn't. He literally didn't sleep for a couple of days, and he was bitter. It was terrible to watch him go through this because he forgot. Yeah, it was a chance affair. Well, we moved out and we started holding chapel elsewhere. And the church moved in, and as small as the church was, they discovered that they couldn't make the payment because they built everything on the assumption that Calvary had no choice but to pay. They were going to basically hold us hostage. And so, I think it was 3 years later, the church, rather than go bankrupt, sold the chapel to Calvary for 1/2 what we would have had to pay if we'd gotten it originally. Now the church, the pastor, by the way, had left, and the church went on, and as far as I know, they're still a great church. It was the pastor, not the church, that was the problem here. But the point is this. Chance, we don't know what's going on. When chance goes against us, we just believe, but there's God in charge of chance, and God's on my side. So, yep, God rules over history. He rules chance too. So if you stub your toe, you're allowed to hurt, but you're not allowed to be angry about it because it's just a matter of luck. Oh, and God rules luck. I didn't get to introduce the stuff for next week, but the stuff we'll be looking at for next week is Ezekiel 37. It is not a hard read, and it's a fascinating passage. You have a kind of a rather lengthy, the paper that introduces it there, the major reading paper, has a nice lengthy context section for you, as well as special vocabulary to help you. Read that context section, because we will talk a lot about the difference between dispensational and non-dispensational interpretation of prophecy next time. Thank you for putting up with me as I got to enjoy myself. I love chewing on these proverbs. I hope I didn't bore you too much. See you next time.